1. I grew up in the suburbs of a large city in Ohio. My neighborhood was like any stereotypical suburb. Really safe, lots of kids. All the parents knew each other. You get the idea. So let me explain the layout to my house, for clarification in the story. So when you walk in the front door, there is a living room which my parents used as their office. And then the kitchen is straight ahead. Right off the kitchen to the left is the master bedroom. Near the front door you went down about 8 steps, and we had a finished basement, which my sister and I used as our playroom, TV room. Then we had the traditional second floor, which had 2 bedrooms for me and my sister. So one night, my parents decided to go out with some friends of my dad. So it's me, my sister Rachel, who was 9, and my dad's friend's son, Ben. I believe he was around 12 or 13. I remember him complaining to his dad, saying he was too old for a babysitter. Whatever. My usual babysitter, Kristen, was watching all of us. She was about 17 at the time and has been watching Rachel and I since we were toddlers. So the night starts out fine. Kristen ordered us a pizza, and we were all watching TV in my basement. We had a large sectional L-shaped couch that we were all sitting on. It was against the wall that backed up to 2 large windows, which faced into the backyard. Since our basement was not a traditional basement, you could clearly see out to the backyard through the windows. So we're all watching a movie. I remember it was a new Spider-Man movie with Tobey Maguire, as this was around 2002 to 2003. We had been in the basement for a while. At around 10 p.m., I hear what sounds like someone walking around upstairs on the second floor. The ceiling in the basement lined up to where our bedrooms were on the second floor. I look at everyone else, and they heard it too. My house is older, but I still know what the sounds of people walking around sound like, as opposed to just old house noises. I have a large Labrador retriever, so I figure she's just upstairs walking around, and we all ignore it. About 2 minutes later, I go upstairs to my kitchen to get water, and I notice my dog sleeping on the couch in my parents' office area. She had obviously been there a while, and she was in a deep sleep. At this point, my 7-year-old self is freaking out, wondering who the fuck was walking around upstairs. I also want to point out that a month earlier, when Kristen babysat me and Rachel, she let us watch the original Halloween. So I had been convinced since then that Michael Myers was hiding around every corner of my house, wanting to kill me. Who lets a 7-year-old watch that movie? But on with this story. I tell Kristen that the dog is asleep on the first floor, so it couldn't have been her walking around. She looked a little nervous. But she just tells me the house is old and makes weird noises, and to just watch TV and not worry about it. So about 15 minutes later, we hear it again. We put the TV on mute and listen. The walking continues for about 10 seconds after we mute the TV, then stops. At this point, we're all about to shit ourselves, but being the dumb kids we are, we decide to go upstairs and see what the fuck is going on. Because looking for an intruder in your house always ends well, right? We take my dog with us. We go into me and Rachel's rooms and don't see anything. But all of us were freaked out. We all heard the same thing. So we decided to go down the stairs to my parents' room. The plan was to lock the door and just keep it together until my parents and Ben's parents got back. My parents' room was the only one we had not thought to check, since it was on the first floor. We opened the door and turned on the lights, only to find the window wide open. We didn't have screens. No idea why. It was in early November in Ohio. There was no way my parents had left the window open intentionally. At this point, I want to cry. After checking out the room and determining no weirdos are hiding under the bed, Kristen closes the window, locks the door, and pushes a chair under the doorknob. Kristen decides to call my dad and tell him to come home. Why we didn't call 911, I don't know. I don't think any of us wanted to believe someone would actually break into my house. She picks up the phone, and there's no dial tone. This was not unusual, as the phone in my parents' room was very old, and frequently didn't work. It was one of those old phones you had to dial by twirling your finger in a circle. This was also before every 17-year-old had a cell phone, so we relied on landlines. Ben offers to run down to the basement to grab the other phone. He runs downstairs and is back in literally 15 seconds, and he looks like he is about to pee himself. He said when he went to grab the phone, he looked out the window that looks into our backyard and saw a person just standing there, about 50 feet away from the window, just looking straight into our house. Not moving. Kristen decides we need to call 911. She clicks the green button to call, and there's no dial tone. Someone was messing with the phones. Kristen brought up the idea of making a run to her car, but no one wanted to go outside after what Ben saw. At this point, it's past 11 p.m. My parents had said they would be home between midnight and 1 a.m., so we decide to wait it out and try not to shit ourselves. We turn on the TV in my parents' room really loud to drown out any weird noises and just try to stay calm, knowing the door is locked, and we have a large dog with us, along with a baseball bat my dad kept under the bed. My parents ended up getting home earlier than expected, as they started to worry when they couldn't get a hold of us by phone to check in. We told my parents what happened and ended up calling the police and filing a report. Since we lived in a safe neighborhood, things like this were not a normal occurrence. When the police went out to investigate the phone issue, the phone line had been cut. They also found 4 or 5 cigarette butts on the ground near the windows that looked into our basement where we had been eating and watching TV. We could clearly be seen through the curtains sitting on the couch. No one in my family smokes. Whoever broke in or tried to break in had clearly been watching us for a while and knew no parents were home. We never found out if someone was actually in our house. The police searched all the rooms and nothing was missing or looked out of place. But the windows in me and Rachel's rooms were not locked. It was possible the man broke in through my parents' bedroom and then escaped out the second-story window. The drop would have been about 10 feet, so not impossible. The police took it seriously and patrolled my street for the next week. They never found the person who Ben saw, but the incident stayed with me for a long time. I was terrified to stay home by myself until I was almost 16, and I made my parents buy thick curtains for the basement so no one could see into the house. I am now a 21-year-old college junior, and I still get freaked out when I have to stay in my apartment alone. I still wonder to this day what the hell that person was doing, and what their intentions were. I'm not a religious person, but I thank God that my parents had the good sense to come home when they did. Who knows what would have happened had they stayed out any longer. So to the weirdo who may or may not have been in my house, let's not meet like ever. 2. For the past 1 year and 9 months, I have been living alone and 9 hours away from home due to my job. I'm not the most social person. My gym manager and a few stray cats aside, I haven't made any friends in this city. I'm generally fine being alone, but after almost 2 years of solitude, and with Ramadan approaching, a usually festive and family-oriented time in my country, even I begin to feel a bit lonely. So yesterday afternoon, as I was about to get off work, I started to contemplate my dreadful return to my empty flat, and thought perhaps it wouldn't be a bad idea to get a flatmate, or move in with one. I'd actually been thinking about this for a few weeks. I got my phone out, quickly found a few ads, and saved some numbers. Once home, I decided to call one I had saved as Mehdi Rent. Mehdi was apparently the landlord's name. He was renting out the still available room in his 2-bedroom flat. He sounded like a decent guy over the phone, and we decided to meet up near the supermarket in a few minutes, as I couldn't figure out the exact location to the flat. Still in my office attire, I head out to meet him and was in front of the supermarket 5 minutes later. Some 15 minutes went by, and there was still no sign of Mehdi. I called him again to let him know I was there, and he confirmed that he was on his way. Soon afterwards, he showed up and greeted me with what seemed like excessive delight to me. The way you might greet someone you actually know and haven't seen for a long while. He proceeded to make small talk, and then casually asking a bunch of stuff. I assume any landlord might ask. Example, I'm guessing you're not from town. Are you a student? I look younger than I am. What do you do? Where are you from? Stuff like that. I felt like he was being a bit overbearing, but thought nothing of it. Several awkward responses later, I asked if we could go see the flat. His smile changed into an inquisitive frown for the briefest moment before he resumed his exceedingly gleeful attitude and said, "Yes, of course." I started to walk behind him, and as we turned around the corner, he gestures to an old Renault 19. I had no idea he'd come by car and had assumed we were walking to the flat since it was supposed to be close to the supermarket, so I was surprised. I'm a ridiculously trusting person, and displeasing people is almost a phobia of mine. But I was hesitant to get into the car. It wasn't out of concern for my safety. I'm an idiot. I'm just from a conservative society, and as a young woman, it would be really inappropriate to get into a car with some random dude I just met. Being a fellow member of said conservative society, I'm sure he knew this as well. He seemed to notice my discomfort at the suggestion, but asked me to get in anyway. Being generally unable to say no, I complied. As he drove, he attempted more small talk, but I was super uncomfortable and only responding with short interjections. I had my phone in my hand and I got some notification, so the screen lit up. Just lit up with a small vibration, no sound. It was on silent. I didn't even check it. But along with my taciturn disposition, it seemed to have vexed him greatly. His weirdly upbeat attitude dissolved in a moment, and I was sternly ordered to put my phone on the back seat. At first, not knowing how to respond to this, I gave him an incredulous look. Seeing his lack of reaction to my disbelief, I thought maybe I am being rude. So I started to put it inside my handbag, but he was adamant I put it on the back seat, and repeated the oddly specific command. I'm somewhat alarmed by the unwarranted fervor at this point, and decide to keep my phone in my hand instead. So I timidly replied, "No, I'm fine," which wasn't enough to deter him. He brought out his own phone, turned it off, and turned to me to say, "See? I put yours on the back seat." I essentially ignored him because I didn't know what else to do or say. We had been driving for maybe 3 minutes, so I asked him if we're near the flat, and he says yes. Another 2 minutes or so went by. I'm starting to get really nervous, and I ask again, and get the same response. Then I ask if the woman occupying the other room wouldn't mind the visit, which was probably a silly question, but I just wanted to find out whether she would be there, seeing as I wasn't keen on being alone with this guy in a flat. His facial expression morphed into the same inquisitive look he had assumed earlier, and he remained silent for a second, before saying she wouldn't mind. I thought nothing overly suspicious had happened so far, but I was getting overwhelmed by a terrible sense of dread for whatever reason. Something about this man just didn't feel right. This feeling was shortly confirmed when he caressed my hand. I got startled and instinctively flinched away, then finally mustered up enough courage to ask him to stop the car. Instead of stopping, he put a firm hand on my thigh and flatly told me to calm down. Further internal panic ensued, but I tried to keep my outward composure and asked him again to stop the car. I was ignored, and he kept attempting to touch me. I was absolutely freaked out at this point, and thinking I should just jump out of the car because God knows where this creep is taking me, and what might happen to me. This was a car from the 80s, and you had to unlock the doors manually by pulling up that little thingy, for which I don't know the English word. I looked at my door to check, and it was unlocked. We were, thankfully, coming to an intersection and a stop sign, where he'd have to slow down to almost a halt. So I thought this was my chance to get out. I'm still trying to get his hand off me as the car starts to slow down. Meanwhile, my phone starts vibrating in my hand, and I look at my screen. Initially I was confused and couldn't comprehend what I was looking at. But no words can describe the sheer terror that overcame me when I saw the caller's name. Mehdi. Rent. For a fraction of a second, I was just paralyzed by the chilling realization that this guy was even more of a stranger than I'd thought. That he'd likely realized at some point that I thought he was someone else, yet decided to pretend he's actually who I thought he was anyway, to keep me in his car. The car had slowed down considerably when I snapped out of my stupor, opened the door, and bolted out like a rocket. I started running out of sheer fear and shock, but slowed down to a walk when I looked back and saw that he didn't come out of the car. He had just completely stopped, stayed there for a while, then slowly drove away. I got back to the supermarket and met the real Mehdi. I had called my gym manager, friend, meanwhile, and waited for her to arrive. I wasn't going anywhere alone with anyone after what had just happened. We saw the flat, which turned out to be nearly in ruin and nothing like the one pictured in the ad. So I went home, still terrified and with no prospect of non-creepy companionship. This just happened yesterday, so I'm still overcome with panic when I think about what this guy might have had in mind. I think it's time for me to seriously learn to say no and just generally stop being this dumb. 3. I'll never forget that night. It was last year. I had just turned 25. I'd been to a friend's wedding in another state and was returning by train. I reached the station around 5 a.m. It was freezing as the temperature had hit 4 degrees. All I could think of was getting home fast so I could sleep for hours after being tired for many nights. I generally avoid traveling alone in the dark, but it was impossible to wait at the station till sunrise because 1 hour seemed like a very long time, so I decided to get a taxi. The distance from the station to my apartment is roughly 40 kilometers. There were 2 taxis, and I got into one of them without making any eye contact with the driver. I told him where I wanted to go, and we started. This man must have been in his late 50s or early 60s, silver grey hair, big built. I decided to go with this taxi because I thought I'd be more safe with this fellow since he was elderly. It was a mistake. Nearly 15 to 20 minutes had passed. I was looking at the road ahead. There were very few cars, and all I could see were trees that were close by and fog covered everything else. Suddenly I noticed that this guy had been staring at me from the rear view mirror, and he didn't blink or look away when I looked at him. It had been over 2 minutes and he was still staring. He had scary, droopy eyes. I was very uncomfortable at this point, so I used my scarf to cover half my face, which was only covering my neck all this while. This didn't stop him, and he suddenly started laughing like a maniac. Then he said a word in some other language, I believe, so I asked him to repeat. My heart was beating very fast. "So many people are dying," he said, and started laughing again. I was too afraid to ask him any questions. I stood there, frozen, regretting why I didn't wait at the station. My hands were shivering because I was trying to send a message to a friend, but my fingers just couldn't type properly. He turned around now, facing me, asked me if I was married. I managed to speak nervously. "No." And he said, You will repent." With these words, he started to speed up. My mind was going crazy now. What the fuck did he mean by that? Why would he say such a thing to me? I tried looking around to see if it was a good idea to get out of that taxi. But it was still very dark, and there weren't many cars around. Maybe 2 or 3 cars would pass us every 5 to 10 minutes. By this point, I was pretty convinced that he was taking me to some other place. Maybe he wasn't, but I was too terrified to think straight. I was trembling with fear, and I was sure he was going to attack me or do something worse. Suddenly he slowed down, and he seemed to be talking to himself. "People die. He'll die. She'll see," pointing to the empty seat. With those words, he stopped the taxi right there and asked me to get down, saying, "We need fresh air, and the petrol is over." He wasn't drunk, but he had been hallucinating since he kept blabbering, looking at the empty seat, and was laughing for no reason. Arguing with him would make him annoyed, so I decided to do as he said, until I got some help, or maybe I could stop him in some way by agreeing to all his demands. I got off the taxi, and this guy got off too. Now he was right in front of me, but at a car-length distance, holding a torch, pointing it on his neck, repeating, "You will repent." I was almost crying due to fear, but running was impossible, because I could have been run over by some car due to the fog, and my mind was not working properly by this point. The thought of calling someone didn't occur to me earlier, and now it was too risky, since this maniac was standing right there, holding that torch and moving his head like some possessed person. It felt like a scene from a horror movie, and his eyes appeared bigger than normal due to torchlight that illuminated his creepy, now serious face. He said something again which I didn't understand. I was sure he was going to kill me or torment me before that. I was extremely restless and looking around for help. To my relief, there was a car passing by, and it stopped there, looking at us just standing in the middle of the road. The guy came running to me and asked me to go towards his car, where his daughter, who was nearly my age, opened the door. The insane cab driver ran back to his taxi and drove off in seconds. Clearly, there was enough petrol. I was still breathing heavily and told him what had happened in the last 30 or 40 minutes. He told me I was in the opposite direction, and it was not a safe place since many incidents with girls had happened there already. I was right. That driver was taking me to some other place. They had sensed something was wrong by the way the maniac stood there holding the torch, and that light showed my silhouette more clearly, so they decided to check what was going on. Had they not stopped, I wouldn't have been able to narrate this incident. Since that night, I never travel alone at night. Never ever. I am thankful to those people who saved my life. Sometimes we see many people who say they need help, but we fear it could be a trap, and we don't stop. Had they thought the same, I'd be dead. So this was the incident that still scares me when I think about all the events that happened that night. I don't want to see or meet that driver again. Hey everyone, Hellfreezer here, and thank you very much for listening to episode 78. Well, I'm a bit swamped for time this week, as I believe I've kind of explained the reason for that right now. So I didn't really have time to source anything else, but I've always got a bunch of good true scary stories ready to record. I'm very fortunate in that. So that's what we have today, and of course, as usual on Wednesday, we'll have more true scary stories then. Well, I'm a bit tired, busy day, not much sleep. Got another week of that ahead of me. So I'm just going to make this a short outro, and just thank you so much for watching. So until next time, thank you very much for listening, and take good care of yourselves.